The Carcharadons Astra. The Space Sharks. They were dispatched into the outer darkness upon that first day of exile, there to ravage the foes of mankind until their final atonement. Their Forgotten One gave them remit unbound, to set about the traitor, the alien, and the renegade without mercy, and to harrow them in their places of strength. So began their long hunt. They hunt still. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the important faces, factions, and forces of the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we are to deal with one of the fringe chapters of the Space Marines, the Carcharadons. Alas, I am still harboring my creative energies for some works I am writing at the present, so this is rather a meat and two veg kind of entry. I can only assure you that this format is certainly not to become the norm, and is only used to permit more to be done on the bigger entries, which I feel all enjoy. So, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, the Carcharadons. The Carcharadons, also known as the Carcharadons Astra in High Gothic, and sometimes as the Space Sharks in Low Gothic, are a loyalist marine chapter of an unknown founding, though it has been alleged to be either an ancient chapter born as early as the second founding, or a relatively new chapter raised during the 23rd founding. The Carcharadons are an alleged successor chapter of the Raven Guard, though this remains unconfirmed. They participated in the later stages of the Badab War, returning from the Outer Void to punish those they saw as traitors to the Imperium of Man and the Emperor himself. The Carcharadons have always been a fleet-based chapter, following the far rarer nomad predation pattern, rather than the more common crusading pattern adopted by countless other mobile Space Marine chapters. In recompense for their role in the Badab War and the tacit agreement of the Firehawks, the new masters of the Mantis Warrior chapter's territory in the Endymion cluster, the Carcharadons received permission to harvest new recruits from this promising group of feral and feudal worlds of the Maelstrom Zone. Ransacking the Mantis Warriors' hidden armories and bases, the Carcharadons then departed from the Ultima Segmentum, embarking again on their solitary crusade. However, since the creation of the Great Rift and the start of the Era Indomitus, the Carcharadons have been granted the Mantis Warriors' former homeworld of Oertheka to do with as they please. The Carcharadons may actually be the same chapter as the Space Sharks. The term Carcharadons might simply be a fragment of their name translated into High Gothic, as Carcharadons Astra, for that same unit of Astartes. The founding of this Space Marine chapter remains shrouded in the mists of a long-lost antiquity, thousands of standard years in the past, though it has been stated in Imperial and chapter records that the Carcharadons have been serving the Void Father, i.e. the Emperor, for 10 standard millennia. This alone would not be enough to warrant special consideration, but the Carcharadons' mystery has not lessened in recent centuries. Rather, it has grown with each bloody deed and unexpected strike the Carcharadons perform. Now, the very name of the chapter is synonymous with the cold, dark depths of the void, and the hungry predators that lurk within. The Carcharadons are a mysterious and enigmatic chapter of the Astartes, having forged for themselves a dark and bloody legend in the minds of those that survived the conflict known as the Badab War. returning from the black void of space beyond the furthest reaches of the galaxy as strangers to both friend and foe alike. The Carcharadons sided with the Loyalists against those that would challenge the Imperium of the Divine Emperor. The exact origins of this infamous chapter are hard to pinpoint in Imperial archives, as the Carcharadons have left no records of their activities in recent history. They feature nowhere within the open Imperial records, and likewise, the chapter has no officially recorded battle honours. Furthermore, this chapter is often misidentified with other lesser-known chapters operating with similar nomenclatures and symbology, i.e. the Void Reapers or Blood Sharks, etc. However, sealed and secured records within the Inquisition may shed some light as to the true origins of this chapter. The oldest of these ancient treatises on the wars of the Imperium of Man may be found within the pages of the Mythos Angelica Mortis, written by the savant scribes of the Sectariat Militum of Terra, late in the 35th millennium. References are made in this oft vague and incomplete work to a Space Marine chapter identified as the Carcharadon Astra. They were dispatched into the outer darkness upon an endless voyage to ravage the foes of mankind, and to set about the traitor, the alien and the renegade without fear, and harrow them in their places of strength. This text stems from a far older work, now lost, dating back to the unknown era that surrounds the Astropath Wars of the late 32nd and the early 33rd millennia. This is a time now shrouded in myth and allegory, and its true nature has been purged from Imperial history so thoroughly that less is known of it than the Horus Heresy or even the Great Crusade. Other records give chapter variations in name or title, such as the Space Sharks, but all the accounts are consistent on certain similarities of iconography and operation, and in their description of the Carcharadons' bestial but calculated savagery in combat. To this chapter was afforded the sacred and unending duty to travel the interstellar night beyond the Imperium's borders, to locate and destroy the enemies of mankind before they could penetrate Imperial space. The only other tantalizing clues to the chapter's origins can be offered up by those few Imperial servants who have had the dubious honor of encountering the enigmatic Carcharadons in the flesh. For the most part, these individuals have been dispatched to explore the outermost bounds of the galaxy, explorators, rogue traders, and the like. Beyond these rare encounters recorded in various fragmentary Imperial data vaults, the only information forthcoming on the Carcharadons are the stories of their oft-bloody deeds across the galaxy. Notable campaigns: the Solar Rebellions, circa Millennium 32. Across 100 scattered systems in the western marches of the Segmentum Solar, Chaos Cult uprisings led by a corps of Chaos Space Marine warbands drawn from the Iron Warriors, Night Lords and World Eater traitor legions brought entire planetary governments to their knees in a year of blood and anarchy. With whole sectors on the brink of collapse, events took a dramatic turn when a combined force of the Adeptus Astartes emerged from the back depths beyond the Spiral Arm, and launched a sudden and overwhelming attack directly upon the uprising's command. Though many loyal Space Marines fell in glory, the warlords of the traitor factions were slain, and the uprising fractured into 1,000 localized rebellions, which were soon put down by local Imperium forces. Subsequent inquisitorial studies claimed that these Space Marines were drawn from several chapters, including the Carcharadons, Minotaurs, Death Eagles, and Angels of Absolution. Other evidence, however, including their estimated founding and projected deployment dates, contradict these assertions, consigning the entire event to conjecture. The Astropath Wars, circa 888 Millennium 32. The details of this conflict remain unknown, but it can be assumed from the name that astropaths were involved in some manner. The Pentarchy of Blood, circa 860 to 940 Millennium 33. During the dark and bloody episode of Imperial history known as the War of the False Primarch, which plunged the Segmentum Pacificus into anarchy and has now largely lost to myth and purged from the Imperial record. The Pentarchy of Blood was convened by the High Lords of Terror to enact their judgment. 5 chapters: the Carcharadons, the Charnel Guard, the Death Eagles, the Flesh Eaters, and the Red Talons, were used to systematically destroy 11 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, judged Traitoris Perdita, and lay waste to their homeworlds, finally drawing the 8 solar decade-long conflict to a close. The 7th Black Crusade, circa 811, Millennium 37. The 7th Black Crusade was one of the crusades led by the infamous War Master of Chaos, Abaddon the Despoiler, and his Black Legion. Launched out of the Eye of Terror in 811 Millennium 37. When the Blood Angels Space Marines battled against the chaotic horde at the world of Midian, Abaddon singled them out with implacable fury. He led a band of Quanite berserkers into the teeth of the Blood Angels' devastated positions. Even the Blood Angels' own assault marines could not dislodge the frenzied warband and recapture the bodies of their comrades. But there is an obscure reference to the Blood Angels being saved by an unidentified Space Marine chapter of mysterious origin. Written within the Canticle of Cassandria Lev, volume 106, is the eponymous Sainted Sisters' highly mythologized and oblique account of the War of the 7th Black Crusade. Within them is found mention of grey-clad Space Marines who came from the outer night to aid the Imperium, and whose jagged maw did swallow the stars, and whose black gaze did mirror the void of the oblivion. In the course of the Canticle, this chapter's ship set upon Abaddon's forces following the disastrous defeat and routing of the Blood Angels at Midian, and attacked the pursuing forces as St. Liv writes, fell upon the servants of the Scald One with great fury from the darkness, unseen as the beast that lurks beneath the black waters, death from death, blood from blood. Thus were the sons of Sanguinius brought respite, and did turn upon their pursuers, and so were the damned traitors of the false god driven unto ruin. Images of these events can be found upon the walls of the crypto world of Hypacetus, created to house the honoured dead of that war, depicted in repeated fresco and bas-relief. But curiously, the faces of the intervening Space Marines were depicted as obscured with featureless discs of black obsidian. Given the largely unknown history of the Starfaring Carcharadons chapter, accounts of their activities can only be construed from recorded historical incidents and fragmentary records that are believed to have involved the Carcharadons on balance of evidence. This notable engagement is listed by Imperial savants as probable encounter recorded sighting of this notorious chapter. The Angevine Crusade, 322 to 384 Millennium 39. During the Angevine Crusade that conquered the Calyx Expanse and founded what was eventually called the Calixis Sector, the rogue traitor Basil Horothis led his ship, the Star Avenger, and a considerable force of naval armsmen against the debased Tukari pirates on the world of Loth. However, Horothis found his forces much reduced in the fighting on that world of perpetual night. During the eternally roiling clouds, and illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of lightning, the rogue trader's armsmen suffered greatly from the savage hit-and-run raids of the cabal of Shadowed Thorns. Even as Horothis realized his error and made plans to withdraw from Loth's accursed surface, the cabal of Shadowed Thorns struck the Stark Venger. A sudden attack from a flight of razor-wing fighters crippled the cruiser's main drives, slewing the starship out of low orbit. The damage left Horothis with only one choice. Testing his considerable skills as a ship handler, he attempted planetfall aboard the Venger. The ship did not reach the ground easily, and only through the considerable skills of Horothis and his master helmsman, Orgef Keel, did the Venger survive at all. However, their landing left them in an arguably worse predicament than mere death. Trapped with their breach vessel, Horothis and his crew found themselves surrounded by capricious foes. Quickly, the Drukhari encircled the ship and its hastily thrown up defensive fortifications, striking at random to kill and capture slaves. All Herothis could do was send out an astropathic plea for deliverance and use the ship's batteries in an attempt to keep the Xenos pirates at bay. After a solar month, the Venger's guns were all but spent, and many of her crew whisked away into the darkness. The Cabal of Shadowed Thorns grew bold and began to press a sustained attack into the downed void ship. The fighting reached the bridge, but as Herothis and his retainers struggled desperately against a press of cavorting witch gladiators, help arrived. Suddenly, 2 bolts of bruise-coloured lightning split the mass of witches, slaying some outright and scattering the rest. The strikes left behind 2 hulking grey-clad figures, fuming with hoarfrost and reeking of ozone. Without a pause, the 2 Space Marine Terminators tore into the witches with hissing lightning claws. In moments, the decks were slick with gore, and the panicked remnants were fleeing for their lives. The same happened all across the vessel. The survivors told of hundreds of assault Terminators, though there could not have been more than a dozen, appearing wherever the battle was thickest to rip through the invaders with savage butchery. So fierce was the counterattack that the Drukhari quickly fled the Venger. On the shadow-shrouded plains beyond the hull, Thunderhawks disgorged 80 grey-clad warriors armed with bolter and blade. Confusion, fear and rage overtook the Drukhari pirates, and they flew towards the Space Marines. No doubt they intended bloody revenge. However, the Space Marines awaited the assault implacably. Drawn up in loose ranks outside their gunships, they did not fire a single shot, even when beams of dark energy began to crackle overhead. When the fastest scourgers were no more than 100 meters from the Space Marines' lines, the Emperor's Chosen sprang their trap. The gloomy surface of Loth knew light for the first time in eons, as searing lance beams split the clouds. In an incredible display of precision targeting, they scoured the ground around the Venger and the Space Marines to boiling lava, incinerating the Drukhari. Only then did the Space Marines spring into action, hunting the survivors until they fled wailing back to their webway gates. In the aftermath of the incident, Herothis spoke briefly with the commander of the Space Marines. Herothis later described this Astartes as deathly pale of countenance, with blank, black eyes and sharp teeth. Speaking only in ancient High Gothic, he informed Herothis that reinforcements from the Crusade were inbound, and politely but firmly requested a tithe of war supplies from the Venger's vaults. He refused to identify himself or his men, and departed 3 solar days before the arrival of Imperial Navy outriders. It was only after the Crusade's inquisitorial representatives questioned Herothis, now busy establishing his estates on Loth, that they realized these Space Marines belonged to no chapter affiliated with the Crusade, and drew connections between ancient myths of a long-forgotten chapter. Battle of Zartak, circa 800, Millennium 41. On the Imperial prison world of Zartak, a warband of Night Lords and their demonic allies descended to harvest the planet's population for sinister ends. Imperial personnel and the world's arbitrators were swiftly cut off and butchered by the insidious traitors. The planet, however, was also a target for the Carcharadons, who intended for Zartak to be a source of their latest red tithe. A ferocious battle erupted in the shadows of the underground prison, where the skills of both groups were put to the test. Corridors and mineshafts ran red with transhuman blood, as the Night Lords were gradually cornered and rooted out. The final battle was met in the prison's primary geothermal sink shaft, where the Night Lord's leader was killed alongside his bodyguards, and a demonic ritual was narrowly halted by the Carcharadons' chief librarian, Te Kahurangi. The remaining Night Lords swiftly retreated. The traitors dealt with, the Carcharadons commenced the tithe of the prison, and within solar days, the only soul left alive to tell the tale was a single traumatized and blood-soaked arbitrator, surrounded by countless dead bodies. War in the Depths, circa 800, Millennium 41. As the Turnip 5 fleets are inextricably drawn to the light of the Astronomicon, the Carcharadons saw themselves engaged in an escalating war of attrition with the endless spawn of the great devourer on the edges of the galaxy. The Tyranids attacked not from the eastern fringe as their previous brethren, but now approached from beneath the galactic plane, into the soft underbelly of the Imperium. Though the Carcharadons succeeded in annihilating countless splinter fleets as they approached the galaxy's edge, even the stoic Tybros himself saw that this chapter's actions were merely a stopgap against the encroaching menace of Hive Fleet Leviathan. The Devourer denied, circa 800, Millennium 41. The cult of the Star Saints was a massive gene-stealer cult infestation that had contaminated every level of the society of the shrine world of Piety 5. The cult's psychic signal was so potent that it actually began to lure in a Tyranid hive fleet from below the galactic plane. The Tyranid numbers were so great that Tybros saw his chapter faced almost certain extinction. Calling upon ancient pacts, the Carcharadons besieged a renegade Astartes chapter, the Ashen Claws, to aid them. Meanwhile, the third company of Carcharadons, under Captain Baal Shah, was dispatched to Piety 5 to quash the infestation. Tybros hoped that terminating the psychic signal of the gene-stealer Patriarch would be enough to turn back the encroaching swarm. Provoking the cult into a general uprising, the Carcharadons cut through thousands of cultists until, by sheer force of numbers, they were surrounded and forced into a last stand inside Piety 5's primary Imperial Cathedral. However, this was all according to plan, as Baal Shah unleashed not only his Terminator squads, but also an ancient Contemptor pattern dreadnought that ripped through countless screeching mutants. Such bloodshed finally drew the Patriarch into the open, where the foul creature was obliterated by a third company librarian. The death of their leader threw the remaining inhuman filth into disarray, and they broke themselves upon the anvil of grey ceramite armour. The hammer blow came from the sudden arrival of Ashenclaw's reinforcements, and within solar hours, the cult of the Star Saints was grounded down and forced into retreat. The sudden termination of the psychic beacon caused the nearby Hive Fleet to falter in its advance, and it withdrew back to the void beneath the galaxy, sparing the Carcharadons from extinction, if only temporarily. Several solar weeks later, an Imperial retribution force arrived to find Piety 5 a ruined husk, and set about culling the few surviving gene-stealers. The Imperium never learned the full extent of the Carcharadons' sacrifice, or of the unspeakable horror they helped to stop. The Badab War. Redacted. Basically, there are many fine tales in this war, which should not be skipped over in one entry for the Carcharadons. The Badab War is a complicated thing, and a tale worthy of the telling. I do not feel that we should spoil it with this entry here, with a brief overview. The Carcharadon Massacre, 910 Millennium 41. The event that became known in Imperial records as the Carcharadon Massacre was discovered by an Imperial Navy patrol in 910 Millennium 41. The wreckage of a smuggler's base was discovered in the dust wastes of the forlorn world of Carcharadon 2. Within the base was a nightmarish scene of carnage and destruction rarely witnessed before by mortals. A bloody battle had been fought between two sub-company-sized forces of Space Marines from the Executioners and the Carcharadons chapters. These two chapters, both infamous for their savagery and unyielding stances towards their foes, had fought each other to mutual annihilation. The base around them was ripped apart, its former inhabitants now mouldering into dust. Many of the bodies of both sides showed signs of having fought on despite suffering horrendous wounds, severed limbs and massive trauma that should have felled even an Astartes, and several were found locked in deathly, gore-spattered embraces, striking at their foes with their last ebbing strength. It is not known which chapter's last warrior survived to the end to claim a bit of victory. Neither chapter has acknowledged any survivors of the massacre living to tell of what happened at Carcharadon 2. The Indomitus Crusade. The world of Budor 5 was home to the Imperial Castellus Sanctic Citadel. During the Indomitus Crusade, the citadel was captured by a force of heretic Astartes, of the Word-Bearers, who repelled numerous sieges led by elements of the Crusaders' fleet Secundus, battlegroup Betares. When the traitorous Diabolists began to summon demons, they were all slain in a sudden strike by Carcharadon Astartes, under the command of Company Master Manfor, whose strike cruiser Martahe had allied itself with fleet Secundus, coming and going from the void as the Company Master willed. Chapter Organization. As previously mentioned, what few Imperial records exist about the Carcharadons suggest that they are entirely fleet-based, which in turn would suggest that they have fundamental differences from most more conventional Space Marine chapters. Their long isolation may also have an effect on the chapter's war gear. The few starships observed to be serving the Carcharadons were wildly different in design, and even the era of their construction, indicating the chapter likely makes use of whatever vessels it can find, and performs extensive modifications and repairs in order to keep them sailing as long as possible. This carries over into the individual battle brothers as well. Those Carcharadons who have been seen often sport arms of ancient provenance. They are far more likely to carry weapons such as the ancient Phobos R017 pattern bolter or the Mark V Heresy pattern power armor from 10,000 standard years in the Imperium's past, alongside other weapons and gear that span the entirety of that 10 millennium history. Again, it is likely that this is a byproduct of the chapter's enforced self-sufficiency. These attitudes seem to apply to the chapter's overall organization, although anecdotal evidence indicates the Carcharadons roughly conform to the tactical and squad doctrines of the Codex Astartes. This does not carry over to its command structure and company arrangements. Instead, the Carcharadons seem to split their chapter into a number of battle companies designed to operate independently. Each has an augmented auxiliary force of scout marines for reconnaissance and evaluation of the enemy, and a dedicated spearhead of Terminator veterans who serve as a company captain's bodyguard. It seems likely the Carcharadons eschew reserve companies entirely. Those accounts which purport to be of the Carcharadons indicate that they often seem to have abandoned the Codex Astartes prescribed symbols and insignia that signify rank and assignment in a battle company. In their place, the Battle Brothers use a wide range of personal and totemic markings, corresponding with their primitivist tendencies. This is naught but conjecture, however, as again, the Carcharadons are quite unwilling to discuss the intricacies of their chapter's organization. The Carcharadons have been observed to make use of chaplains and librarians, with little deviation from their roles in other chapters. However, apothecaries and tech marines seldom appear outside the Carcharadons' nomad fleet. It is very likely that the Carcharadons recognize the vital role these space marines play in preserving and maintaining their chapter's very existence, and keep them on hand whenever possible. These last two cadres may have been held in reserve in the chapter's fleet, a not uncommon practice for fleet-based chapters who spend long periods in isolation. This structure puts the effective strength of each company at around 100 to 120 initiates and 20 to 30 neophyte scouts, although the exact size and disposition of the Carcharadons chapter as a whole remains unknown. Only a few intelligible accounts of the Carcharadons exist that tell of the chapter's very disciplined order of deployment and battle, despite the evidence from casual observers that they are a barbarous and savage chapter in nature. Their deployments and use of shock assault tactics is highly reminiscent of the Black Templars. Although these chapters are diametrically opposed in character and culture, they tend to display an overriding desire to close with the enemy and shatter their foes in bloody personal combat. Specialist ranks. The Carcharadons' order of battle contains several officer positions not present in other Space Marine chapters, though they largely resemble the standard Codex ranks. Shade Lord. The title of Shade Lord is now used instead of Chapter Master by the commander of the Carcharadons. This title was only known to have been previously used by the exiled Raven Guard commander and former Legion Master Arcus Fowl during the Great Crusade. That it is now used by the Chapter Master of the Carcharadons indicates that Arcus Fowl may have gone on to be the founder of that chapter, who is known to the Carcharadons as the Forgotten One. Company Master. Carcharadon captains are called Company Masters instead. Reaper Prime. A Reaper Prime is an additional title given to a Company Master beyond the captaincy of their own company. It is their job to ensure the chapter is consistently supplied with fresh aspirants, normally achieved during the Red Tithes, when the chapter's edicts of exile permitted to descend on an Imperial world to harvest the population for chapter serfs and potential aspirants. Harvester Prime. A Harvester Prime is an additional title that is also given to a Company Master. It is their duty to seek out archaeotech, on lost technology on the isolated worlds that lie in the Outer Dark. This acquisition of technology is achieved during a so-called Grey Tithe, and traded to the tech priests of Mars for Astartes arms and equipment, per the chapter's ancient pact with the Adeptus Mechanicus. Strike Leader, the equivalent of Sergeant. Void Brother, the equivalent of Battle Brother. Specialist Formations. Red Brethren, Terminator Veteran Marines. These Terminator Armored Elite are the veteran warriors of the chapter. All Red Brethren habitually remain armed and armored at all times. The Terminator battle plate they wear is heavily inscribed with red exile markings, and often hung with yellow Predator incisors that are collected by some Carcharadons. In most chapters, members of the veteran First Company were often seconded to battle companies to supplement their fighting power. In the Carcharadons Astra, they serve an additional purpose. Utterly loyal to the incumbent Shade Master, they are deployed on the most vital missions, usually tithings, to ensure that the overriding objectives are met and the chapter's needs satisfied. The Carcharadons' mode of warfare means that individual companies can spend Terran years separated from the main nomad predation fleet. In such circumstances, the Red Brethren are responsible for seeing the orders of their chapter master carried out. The Red Brethren also, however, fall under the command of the company master they are assigned to, and are bound to follow his orders, provided they do not directly contradict the mission assigned by the Shade Lord. Devourers, the equivalent of Assault Marines. Chapter Recruitment. Red Tithes. It is the duty of a Carcharadon's Reaper Prime, beyond the duties of the captaincy of their company, to ensure that the chapter is constantly supplied with fresh aspirants. This was normally achieved during the so-called Red Tithes, when the chapter's edicts of exile permitted it to descend on an Imperial world and harvest the population. All of them. The vast majority of those taken would go on to become slaves and serf labourers in the chapter's great fleet, providing the means by which the Carcharadons Astra could continue to function in exile. Those of the right age and temperament, however, would undertake the trials. Few would survive to become 10th Company initiates. The degree of attrition during the induction process was higher even than those of most Space Marine chapters, but it was an unavoidable legacy of the Carcharadons' unique nature. The Ancient Pact. The tithes, however, are not the only means of recruitment. During times of desperation, the chapter had recourse to another brotherhood, one that, like the Carcharadons, had chosen the path of exile. The Ashen Claws. During the darkness of the Horus Heresy, not all of the Legiones Astartes had cast in their lot with either the Emperor or the traitor Horus. The Ashen Claws, formerly the Raven Guard's 18th chapter, had despaired at the chaos engulfing the galaxy, and their own Primarchs disgust at their past slaver practices. They had turned against both the Imperium and the forces of chaos, unleashing devastation on the Night Lords and their home sector of Nostromo. Afterwards, they had slipped away, disappearing from both Imperial space and those records that survived the Horus Heresy's carnage. Few now living know they still exist, let alone where they made their home. The Carcharadons Astra are among those few. However, When dealing with these outcasts, the Carcharadons have to step lightly, for negotiations with such renegades are tricky at best, and at worst, often result in bloodshed. The Carcharadons only deal with their renegade brethren in the most dire of circumstances, especially when their own numbers have grown too thin to be replenished by the red tithes alone. This is a direct result of sustaining too many casualties at a rate that cannot be replaced, due to the Carcharadons' never-ending war in the depths. And they cannot increase their rate of recruitment without compromising the induction process or dedicating extra companies to the tithes. War material is the currency the Carcharadons have to pay for their harvest of flesh, but dealing with their erstwhile brethren is a dubious undertaking, for Astartes is a dangerous place. The Ashenclaws do not treat the Carcharadons with the respect they deserve. The Ashenclaw's master will often try to provoke the senior officer of the Carcharadons sent to deal with them, taunting, setting the Carcharadons' representative against each other, seeking to cause them to act rashly so that their hand in the negotiations will be weakened. Grey ties. It is the duty of a Carcharadon's harvester prime, beyond the duties of the captaincy of their company, to ensure that the chapter is constantly supplied with arms and equipment. They are also responsible for seeking out ancient archaeotech on long-lost worlds that lie within the vast void of the outer dark. This acquisition of technology is known as the Grey Tithe. Through ancient pacts with the tech priests of Mars, the Carcharadons trade this lost technology for weapons, power armor, equipment, and even vehicles. In times of desperation, the Carcharadons do not always adhere to the terms of their ancient pact with the priests of Mars, and will often use the Grey Tithes as a means of leverage when negotiating with their renegade brethren from the Ashenclaws for the acquisition of fresh initiates. Chapter Equipment. During previous engagements, the Carcharadons chapter demonstrated a number of highly distinctive traits and trappings that set them apart from their brethren fighting on both sides of any conflict. Their equipment was observed to be of ancient provenance. Much of their weapons, arms, vehicles, war gear, and other technology were of designs and patterns that had covered the span of the Imperium's birth and history. Like many of their fellow chapters, the Carcharadons have been observed making use of librarians within their ranks, with little deviation from their roles in their other chapters. Most chapters train and test chosen psychers, following the ancient ways laid out in the Codex Astartes. Librarians of the Carcharadons are trained in this way, and, with few minor traditional variances, have been taught to live by the word of the Codex. Carcharadons' librarians have a number of unique psychic abilities, only used by the psychers of their chapter, including the following. From the depths. The Carcharadons' librarian clouds the minds of his adversaries with a choking mental darkness, amplifying their fear and surprise so that it paralyzes them. Their minds writhe with images of watery depths of numbing cold and writhing pelagic shapes, leaving them vulnerable to assault. Rending maw. The librarian calls forth the avatar of a great oceanic predator, whose maw erupts from the very ground beneath the enemy. The very stones and earth reform into the shape of jaws and teeth that snap shut, consuming all within in a shower of gore. Chapter Combat Doctrine. Tactically, during the Barab War, the Carcharadons operated almost exclusively as a rapid strike force, disdaining any kind of protracted engagement whenever possible, preferring to approach their targets either with extreme speed or by stealth, which allowed them to strike with the element of surprise on their side whenever possible. Those few who observe a Carcharadon assault and live will be forgiven for assuming that they are mindless berserkers, unconcerned with tactics or planning. In fact, the Carcharadons rely on a series of tactics that at their very heart are both simple and reliable. Though the Carcharadons seem both competent and familiar with armoured vehicles, the core of their tactics rely on large detachments of mobile Space Marine heavy infantry. In this way, the Carcharadons make use of the bloody prowess of their combat brethren to carry the day in battle. The Carcharadons often endeavour to be the initiator of combat actions, and prefer not to fight on the defensive. Tactical operations often begin with a battle company using its integrated scout marine forces and other reconnaissance units such as land speeder and bike squads to probe enemy positions and identify weak points and any target with strategic value. Once identified, the main Carcharadon forces hit these points with overwhelming attacks, eschewing preparatory bombardments or armoured spearheads in favour of complete and overwhelming surprise. They may use drop pods, thunderhawks, or mass teleportation to make these attacks, and the assaulting forces are often a mix of tactical and assault marines, as well as Terminator veterans. Depending on the success of these assaults, the Carcharadons usually follow two responses. If the target position proves well defended, the Carcharadons withdraw. These withdrawals happen almost as quickly as the prior assault, and the Carcharadons fade from the battlefield like ghosts. They will patiently re-evaluate the strength of the enemy positions, then launch another lightning assault at a different point they perceive to be weak. Eventually, one of these assaults succeeds, and then the Carcharadons press the attack to the hilt. Once they commit fully, they dig deep into the enemy's vitals, endeavouring to do as much damage as possible, especially to vulnerable rear areas, as quickly as possible. At this point, the full fury of the Carcharadons is all too apparent, and little survives at this stage of the assault. The Carcharadons prefer fighting at close range, either attacking with point-blank weapons fire, or in melee when they have broken through the enemy line. There is one other interesting and somewhat disturbing detail about the Carcharadons' assaults. Their battles are conducted in complete silence. Any commands from the chapter's leaders are transmitted over a locked and encrypted voxnet, and the battle brothers abstain from issuing any word or sound to friend or foe. To see such carnage enacted without a word or cry is chilling, to say the least. When undergoing boarding operations during ship-to-ship void battles, the Carcharadons are known to employ an ancient and crude but unique weapon known as the Ursus Claws, large barbed lances that are the size of smaller escort ships in their own right. Fashioned like massive harpoons, these lances puncture through an enemy's vessel's hull, and once impaled, the men's spears become active, locking to their prey's ravaged insides with magnetic strength. With malicious slowness, the Carcharadon vessels can then recall their spears, as the lances ratchet back towards the vessel that fired them, dragging them home on massive chains. Once the doomed vessel is within reach of the Carcharadons, they then disgorge their Astartes into the bowels of the impaled enemy ship, and the blooding begins in earnest. This technique was first pioneered during the Great Crusade by the barbarous and bloody-handed World Eaters Legion. Chapter Beliefs. Despite their long isolation from the Imperium, the chapter and its battle brothers seem deeply, almost incredibly loyal. Most of the Carcharadons encountered have shown reverence towards the Imperial Creed and places of Imperial worship. Many also make a habit of carrying devotional items, such as prayer skulls, on their war gear. To the Carcharadons' Astra, the Emperor was Rangu, the Void Father, sire of the Forgotten One. Like the Carcharadons, his vigilance was eternal, a beacon in the night, the bane of the encroaching shadows. The chapter had left humanity for the emptiness of the outer dark, when he had still walked amongst mortals, and they would not return until he did so again. Only with the coming of the Forgotten One could the edicts of exile be overturned, and the chapter's eternal crusade into the darkness be brought to an end. The Carcharadons' Astra are a faithful brotherhood, even by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes. Their creed is an old one, older than the superstitions and misbeliefs of the current imperial cult. Theirs is not some blind faith based on hollow praise and lavish donations. Their memories of the Emperor are of a living, breathing titan, and terror is far more to them than some distant hub of galaxy-spanning bureaucracy. Their connection to it is ancient and primal. It has sustained their loyalty and their determination for 10,000 standard years, amidst the loneliness of the outer dark. When they had first been banished, none had expected them to survive, let alone remain united as a chapter. But survive they did. Their disparate heritage, bound by their faith in him on old Earth. Nothing could shake that. Nothing. Many Carcharadons' battle brothers carry abstract, scrimshaw talismans, or decorate their armour with intricate and abstract line work. These talismans, etchings and traceries often depict highly stylized images of fanged Moors, death's heads, oceanic predators, and the like. This primitivism likely evolved as part of the chapter's unique and impenetrable culture over millennia of isolation. The Carcharadons also hold great respect for the chapter's war gear, for it is forbidden for a lower-ranking Void Brother or chapter serf to lay even a finger upon the war gear of a higher-ranked Astartes. This taboo is referred to by the chapter's battle brothers as tapu. However, all this stands in contrast to the savagery they show to their foes. Merciless is perhaps the best descriptor for the Carcharadons in combat, but even that does not describe the depths of blood-soaked slaughter to which they are willing to descend. They fight with wild abandon that could make even the most impetuous space wolf's blood core take pause, and they do not ask for or grant mercy to their opponents beyond a quick, though seldom clean, death. In a way, they seem to see the universe very much in terms of black and white, enemy and ally. Anyone who stands against the Imperium, for whatever reason, can only expect a brutal demise at the hands of the Carcharadons. The fragmentary records of the Carcharadons indicate that the chapter has no set homeworld. This is not uncommon for Space Marine chapters. The renowned Black Templars chapter, for example, operates solely from its substantial war fleet as part of a perpetual Imperial crusade. However, the Carcharadons do not appear to follow the crusade chapter pattern of operations, relying instead on a much rarer operational strategy known as the nomad predation pattern. The nomad predation pattern evolved in use by Space Marine chapters and certain rogue trader fleets operating beyond the Imperium's borders for extended periods of time. It refers to an entirely self-contained force that can sustain itself without Imperial support whatsoever. A nomad predation fleet may contain as many support vessels as true warships, or it may contain void ships capable of both combat and maintenance repairs. The second possibility may be more likely in the case of the Carcharadons. Given the bellicose chapter's propensity for combat, it seems unlikely they would tolerate vessels in their fleet's ranks that could not hold their own on the battle line. A nomad predation fleet voyages endlessly, pausing only to identify and engage its foes. It must choose its targets carefully, selecting those within its means to destroy, without threatening the fleet's viability as a fighting force. Once it selects the appropriate victims, it can descend upon them quickly and savagely, engaging and destroying potential threats or launching spoiling attacks against foes too large to attack in force. The fleet obtains resources from the vanquished foe before vanishing, safe from any potential retaliation. Though one cannot be certain that this is the means by which the Carcharadons operate, the tactics do seem to perfectly fit their observed behavior. If this is the case, the Carcharadons most likely replenish their ranks in the same manner as other chapters that followed the nomad predation pattern. Namely, they cull potential initiates from among the young of the survivors of their assaults, providing those survivors are human and free of the corrupting influence of the warp. This culling for potential aspirants is known amongst the Carcharadons as a red tithe. These initiates must be subjected to intensive psycho-hypno-conditioning and other harsh procedures designed to strip away any past loyalty, replacing it with the will and attitudes of the Carcharadons. If they successfully pass their initiation trials, initial surgery and indoctrination, these initiates become Scout Marines. When not training with their fellow Scouts, often they will be attached to one of the chapter's 9 battle company commands in order to gain combat experience. After being bloodied in battle over the course of a solar decade or more, they will begin to earn their first exile markings, jagged tattoos that often spiral in loops up their bared forearms and across their pale, shaved scalps. When they are on the cusp of becoming full members of the chapter, they will eventually leave behind the numbered designations all scouts are known by in favor of a true void name, swapping their grey carapace plates and black multi-weave fatigues for the coveted power armour of a full void brother. Nobody knows for certain what Primarch's gene seed led to the creation of the Carcharadons. Opportunities to study the organs involved had been exceedingly rare, and the Carcharadons themselves are singularly unhelpful in this regard. The only clues to their origin that the Death Watch have are from a gene seed extraction performed on a slain battle brother recovered from a massacre site. The body was purportedly from the Carcharadons. The apothecary who performed the extraction later noted that the gene seed seemed untainted, if subject to some long-term degradation. More interestingly, the gene seed bore several genetic markers reminiscent of the Raven Guard bloodline. These markings are uncommon, and a link to the Raven Guard would explain several other details about the Carcharadons as well. The appearance of all Carcharadons shares some singular details. They have greyish pale skin and an almost death-like pallor. Some of the most venerable and ancient Carcharadons have liquid black eyes, without iris or sclera. Beyond this, however, there are no common phenotypes amongst encountered Carcharadons. This suggests that the Carcharadons do recruit from a wide variety of sources, and that their skin and eye mutation is a result of their gene seed alterations to their phenotype. These traits are similar to some of the physical traits of the Raven Guard. However, even if the chapter does count Corvus Corax as its progenitor, many standard millennia of genetic drift would have likely created distinct differences. While travelling through the darkness of space, most Carcharadon Void Brothers sleep in individual cryotanks. It is how the chapter's battle brothers spend a great deal of time in void space. Existing in the lifeless dark beyond the stars is no easy thing. The Carcharadons Astra have been roaming it for 10 standard millennia, cut off from all contact with the wider Imperium. The normal avenues for recuperation and replenishment utilized by other Space Marine chapters are rarely open to them. The suspended hibernation afforded by the cryotanks provides the chapter with a method of rest between combat operations and training cycles, and helps preserve its strength. Typically, it is the younger brethren and initiates who utilize the tanks the most, overcoming deep void sickness through the meditational activities of their newly implanted Suzanne membrane. Older Carcharadons usually find it increasingly difficult to rest, even through their longer voyages. It is said that the eldest of their kind haven't used the tanks for Terran's centuries. The Primarch's Curse. Chill of the Void. The Carcharadons are an insular and taciturn bunch, and this only becomes more pronounced when they are amongst other Space Marines. They also possess a well-deserved reputation for merciless slaughter. If a Carcharadon were to lose his grip on sanity, those traits would likely amplify with unpleasant results. When the chapter's genetic curse manifests itself in an affected battle brother, it comes on in 3 stages. Stage 1. Coldly formal. The battle brother withdraws even more from the company of his colleagues, taking refuge in a chill and formal demeanor. In addition, the battle brother tends to speak almost entirely in High Gothic when addressing a non-Carcharadon, although they can, grudgingly, speak in Low Gothic if need be. Stage 2. Merciless. The battle brother does not tolerate any enemy, whether Xenos, heretic, or even fellow humans who may have been misled into rebellion against the Imperium's rightful rule. The battle brother grimly executes any opponents he encounters, even if they have surrendered, possess valuable intelligence, or are not frontline combatants. Stage 3. Silent as the depths. The battle brother withdraws almost entirely from interacting with others. He will not lead squads, and will almost always carry out missions on his own. Death Watch Service. Though it has happened only rarely, Lone Space Marines in dark grey livery and speaking ancient variants of High Gothic have, on occasions, arrived at the Fortress of the Death Watch in the Jericho Reach, and perhaps elsewhere, in order to fulfill the obligations of their sworn oath. When pressed, some of these Space Marines have said they hail from a chapter known as the Carcharadons. However, beyond these rare encounters recorded in the dusty data vaults of Watch Fortress Erioch, the only information forthcoming on the Carcharadons are stories of their fell deeds throughout the Imperium. Chapter Fleet. The Carcharadons' fleet, though extensive, is inconsistent in makeup. The vessels of the Carcharadons are a mismatch of old and heavily modified classes and capabilities. Within its line of battle are numerous examples of either very ancient, salvaged, or extensively repaired vessels. Many fleet-based Space Marine chapters use the conventional Crusade chapter pattern, which consciously imitates the examples of the Space Marine legions of old. Instead, the majority of the Carcharadons' nomad predation fleet has been in service since the first days of exile, that dark time when the first members of the chapter known as the Wandering Ancestors had been banished from their homeworld, and the ranks of their brethren and ordered out beyond the galaxy's edge. The Carcharadons chapter colours are primarily grey. In many instances, the more conventional emblems of the Imperium are found alongside idiosyncratic markings, often abstract or depictive images and tokens concerning fanged maws, death heads, oceanic predators, and bloody wounds. The Carcharadons chapter badge is a great white shark motif, jaw curling towards tail fin to form a razor-toothed crescent set upon a void of black. Carcharadon origins. Though not officially confirmed, it is implied through various sources that the Carcharadons are likely a successor chapter of the first founding Raven Guard Legion. Their origins might harken back to the bygone era of the Great Crusade. At the time, the so-called Shade Lord, Arcus Fal, was the Terran-born Legion Master of the 19th Legion, before they were reunited with their long-lost Primarch, Corvus Corax, on the World of Deliverance. Once given command of his legion, Corax began to impose the style of war he had preferred upon Lycaeus over that which had defined the 19th Legion of old, particularly by purging the more cold-blooded ways of the Terran Xeric tribes, which had once defined the Legion culture after its founding on the throne world. The Legion had so often served as oppressive, repressive, and occupation forces that Corax saw in some of the Terran members of his Legion something akin to the slavers of Lycaeus. Several of the Legion's highest-ranking officers were displaced or reassigned to non-command roles, including the Shade Lord, Arcus Fal, who had commanded the 19th Legion for 3 solar decades before the coming of the Raven Lord. Under the Primarch's guidance, distilled in a series of battle mantras, the Raven Guard developed their skills to preternatural levels. A small number of mostly Terrans of the Legion of old had been assigned to many of these posts beyond the fringes of the Imperium, some in independent nomad fleets, others attached to various rogue trader militum or other so-called lone wolves. One of these fleets was in fact led by the Legion's former commanding officer, Arcus Fal, on the direct order of the Primarch when Corvus took over the Raven Guard. What became of the Shade Lord, his fleet and the other elements may never be known, and the fact that Corax appeared to have made no effort to recall them suggests that they were considered a body apart from the bulk of the 19th Legion. End quote. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.